Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, members of the listening public. My apologies for the late start as per initial notification. Please bear with me a little bit. I'm a little bit under the weather and have had to impose my own inefficiencies on the situation, but sorry about that. I'm here today to raise a couple of issues for clarification and to allow you to even raise what you might want to raise with me, because I haven't been before you for a few weeks. And there's so much happening that I think maybe I can assist you and you may be able to assist me. Let me begin by dispensing with one matter which has come up very recently. There was a press conference in Tobago yesterday, I think it was. It just came to my attention this morning that the Chief Secretary had a press conference indicating that the central government is acting at the office of the Registrar General in Tobago with some deliberate purpose to reduce the autonomy of the people of Tobago with respect to the services that they had become accustomed to at the Registrar General's office. I think it's unfortunate that an issue, in this case, the issue of what is happening in the Registrar General's office, should be handled in that way. And therefore, as Prime Minister, I want to state categorically that contrary to what the Chief Secretary has attempted to have the population believe, especially the population of Tobago, there has been no deliberate attempt on the part of the government to do any such thing. Upon further investigation and the involvement of information and concerns from the members of Parliament in Tobago, I can now satisfy myself that the issue of the operations of the Registrar General's office in Tobago has once again become an issue that requires the attention of the government. It is not a policy position on the part of the government. It is clearly personalities and interpretations of the law, and the government has to intervene to ensure that any imposition of personal preferences or spurious interpretations of the law are dealt with in the appropriate way. I have today at the Cabinet instructed the Attorney General to take hold of this issue again, to speak with the Registrar General again, to get appropriate advice again, and to ensure that the interests of the people of Tobago are not falling prey to the nuances of individual behavior at the personal level. I say no more on this matter at this time. Secondly, I want to draw the attention of members of the media who have been subjected to the tirades of my parliamentary colleague, the opposition leader. The opposition leader clearly cannot resist opportunities to try and score political points, which is to be expected in that situation of hopelessness. But when the opposition leader is using the media to mislead the population about the behavior of the government, and in some cases, in this case, the behavior of the Prime Minister on a matter of law, I want to clarify for you and through you for the public. This matter, which has come up in the context of the SRC's report, where the opposition leader is seeking to make a case against the Prime Minister for improving his pension in the arrangements of terms and conditions of service is nothing further than a blatant, deliberate attempt at using an untruth to try to create discord in the country. I want to draw your attention to Act number 23 of 1969. This act is called the Prime Minister's Pension Act. It came into force then. This dated 1969. It has only been amended once, and that became Act number 41 of 1976. So it is not true for any person, especially one in office, to be saying to the country that in dealing with the emotive issues of salaries and salaries commission and so on, that the Prime Minister somehow during his tenure has taken care of himself by amending this act. The last time this act was amended was in 1976. So all the Prime Ministers who have been in office since this came into force and the subsequent amendment, the application of the law to emoluments and pensions with the Prime Minister are the same. So there was no need in this discussion of the SRC report for the former Prime Minister, who is in fact falling under these provisions, to be trying to tell the country that something untoward and self-serving has been done or is being done by the Prime Minister. So I put that there. The other issue is the SRC report. It is a statement of fact or a situation of fact that a salaries review report has come to the country, to the Parliament, from the Cabinet, from the President, from the Salaries Review Commission. That issue by its very nature is one that will generate heat, light, emotion, love and hatred, all in one. But one has to understand that it is the end of a long process. The process has been one where the SRC has been working on, in short, phraseology, some kind of a job evaluation for the public service management of the country. With respect to any change, upward movement or thereabouts for public officials, including cabinet members, Prime Minister, parliamentarians, and the other hundreds of people, that work came to a head and was brought in 2024, the SRC report. Again, not unexpectedly, it is generating a lot of debate and advice and angst and anger and so on. And of course, decisions have to be made. What does the law require? Because let us anchor it there. What does the law require? The law requires that this recommending body, the SRC, will do the various analyses and so on, and will present to the President its work. And then it will go on to the Parliament. And again, for clarification, the law is very clear. Once the report is laid in the Parliament, there's no requirement for any debate on it. Of course, anybody can move a motion on anything in the Parliament, but I'm here talking about the law. Right? Now, the response from the population is many and varied about how it should be and why it should be and when it should be and who should get and so on. But I just want to make it quite clear that to personalize this issue is not very helpful, but is expected that it will be. But as Prime Minister, I can't run away from my responsibility. My responsibility is to receive the report from the President and the Cabinet and ensure that the Cabinet gets it to the Parliament. It is now a political issue because salaries and wages and emoluments for public officials, especially those in the Parliament, it's a political issue. So I have no problem with the opposition members and the opposition leader trying to see what political juice they can extract from it. But the decisions on this is something that the office of Prime Minister leading his cabinet or her cabinet can't get away from. Because the only place that this issue can be dealt with and ought to be dealt with is through the office of the Prime Minister, who guides the cabinet and Parliament, and the Parliament approves it upon it being laid there. I see today the opposition leader, having been exposed for misconduct again, is making a comment to you, the media, that the Prime Minister is somehow seeking to hide from the SRC report and the government's decision with the SRC report. I want to make it abundantly clear here today to the population of Trinidad and Tobago that the only time I will be hiding from the public is if I'm afraid of being caught stealing government money. But conducting my oath of office requirements to lay in the Parliament the work of the SRC is nothing to hide from. It's duty. And in terms of accepting the recommendations of the SRC, I have no difficulty in telling the country what the government's position is. This matter came to us, and upon examination, the Ministry of Finance, in its first go-round, saw that there were some grave deficiencies not appropriately dealt with by the SRC. From this podium, I think I told you all, or it was in Parliament, in Ministry of Finance, we will send it back to the SRC so that the SRC could look at what was factually raised as issues to be dealt with. And that was against a background where, as Prime Minister, I received, I think, a 6-page letter from the Chief Justice representing another arm of the state with respect to those officers who were impacted by the outcome of that report. As Prime Minister, I had a responsibility not to ignore the Chief Justice and not to ignore the threat of the law and not to ignore the plight of the judicial officers who run the state. That's my job. And that's why they have one Prime Minister in the country. I have no problem with the opposition leader not agreeing, because she's the opposition leader. But there's one Prime Minister whose responsibility is to treat with what the Chief Justice is saying to me and what the SRC is saying to the Cabinet through the President, and then the government goes forward from that. There's no need for any man over it or anything to hide from. So it went back to the SRC, and we gave them a time limit to come back. And they did come back somewhere close to, if not the same day. I can't believe what happened. This second report, I can tell you, as it's before the Parliament now, I have received and I've seen correspondence between the Attorney General and the Secretary, I think the Chairman of the Statutory Commission, where an issue has arisen with respect to a group of officers who have been impacted by recent developments in the Parliament. Recently, the Attorney General had we had a proclamation done, and the outcome of that was that certain officers under the JLSC were falling in certain locations in the SRC groupings, and some of those officers are complaining that as a result of the recent proclamations, they are unfairly treated by the SRC. I've seen the correspondence, and as Prime Minister responsible for taking the matter through the Parliament, to the Parliament, I have asked the Attorney General to raise with the President the concerns of this group of officers who have made a claim of their treatment by the SRC, and the President is being asked to refer that singular matter to the SRC for further review and to come back in the normal process with their position on it for those officers. All of this in an attempt to ensure that I discharge my responsibility as head of the Cabinet, responsible for the interests of all the officers who fall under that report. And that is how I treat with this matter. to come to the point of whether or not the government will accept the findings of the SRC and be damned, I want to say here today, if it is that there are those who believe the country's leadership is of no value, produces no value, and should be ashamed to accept the recommendation of a commission whose job it is to have done the work and to make recommendations to a cabinet. If it is that there's a view that one should be ashamed or to hide from that, I take full responsibility for advising the cabinet that after 13 years of this work, that the members of the government who run this country, a $60 billion enterprise, that the acceptance of the SRC report after 13 years is a matter for the cabinet, and the cabinet should have no difficulty in concluding that matter in the way that the government is now saying that we will conclude it. And secondly, for those who believe that this is hurtful to other people, I simply want to say that the order of doing things has to be taken into account. I know there are those who believe that members of the cabinet ought not to be, or the parliament ought not to be, in fact, taken seriously. But let's face it, who is exactly being impacted here? It is not only the Prime Minister and the cabinet, it is the entire management structure of the country. And therefore, to say that the country can't afford to reasonably compensate its management structure is to make an admission that I don't want to make, because I don't think that's a reasonable conclusion. And therefore, I will accept the work of the commission. That's why, in the details of what I just said about the JLSC members, the cabinet is not going to try to adjudicate on those nuances in there, but send it back to the SRC and let them deal with it and advise the cabinet as to what is it. And one has to assume that in doing its work, that the SRC would look at the issues raised by other people in the country to come to a recommendation. I make that assumption. And that assumption is that the SRC would make the recommendation, and to deal with it by acceptance is a political issue. Always has been, and always will be. And that is why today, for telling the country that we will accept the recommendation, I am prepared to deal with it as a political issue. Because it is a political issue, and that is why I'm not surprised that the opposition leader is out of the blocks, trying to get a leg up in a political issue. But in misleading the public by saying that I don't want it, when in fact it doesn't even concern her. Because in this particular situation, as a former Prime Minister, while she's stirring up heat, knows very well that nothing that goes on there affects her. Because as a former Prime Minister, her payment from a pension angle is already set in under the Pension Act. And insofar that she's still functioning in the Parliament, arrangements are being made that even if the new highest level that is offered to her falls into play, she still is not affected in any way. And I want the population to know that and to receive their recommendation in that context. As for other persons who believe that the best thing to do to the country is to say, okay, we will not accept it, but we will pay ourselves differently, I don't lead my troops in that direction. And as for the people in the country who believe that if the members of the government and the parliament are in fact to accept the recommendations of the committee that is set under the Constitution for that express purpose, is for them to be ashamed, then so be it. So be it. We believe that we bring value by working hard, by working honestly for the people of the country. And the benefits are there to be seen by those who want to see benefits. And that is where the political discussion comes in. And that is why it's the political issue for those who want to discuss it on a political platform. I am ready to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just come back from some important meetings in Guyana with CARICOM and the government of India. It wasn't my intention to leave the country again, but another development has come up in Barbados this weekend, where a high-level delegation from the United States is in the region wanting to meet with certain CARICOM leaders, and I have been persuaded that I should be there. So I travel tomorrow morning to Barbados to meet with some decision makers and ranking members of the United States government, which is currently in transition, as you know. We have a number of issues on the table, which are not the least of which is something which called the Bridgetown Initiative, where we have been fighting with the Bretton Woods institutions to treat us more fairly in these difficult times, and also to get terms and conditions with respect to our external financing of our countries. This approach, which was led by Prime Minister Motley as a CARICOM cabinet person who is responsible for it, I have been involved in it with her. We've been to Washington on more than one occasion. The US delegation has been to the Caribbean. We think we've made some progress, but it has been crystallized in something called the Bridgetown Initiative, which we need to defend and grow and advance to the US authorities and to the international financial bodies. And therefore we'll meet in Barbados on Saturday, well, from Friday afternoon into Saturday, and I come back on Sunday, hopefully. We cannot but be engaged in these issues. They have far-reaching consequences. And these are the kinds of issues that, unfortunately, I can tell you, don't make the national conversation sufficiently. And therefore, we spend a lot of our time and effort on matters that are of lesser import. You would see, as we talk about this matter of compensation for members of parliament, you will see this issue about back pay for the Prime Minister consuming so much time and pages. But, you won't see anything about the same parliamentarians not wanting to take part in the parliament about accounting for $900 million. So we've got to get our priorities right. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not one to shy away from my responsibilities. The responsibility of the office of Prime Minister in this country is quite onerous, not pleasant and every day. But when it becomes personalized, I take my exit on that. On the SRC report, you would not see my name. You would see a recommendation as to what is reasonable as an emolument for the office of Prime Minister. The decision I have to make is to whether that is a reasonable recommendation. Benefiting personally is not the consideration. As to whether the Commissioner of Police is well positioned at $31,000 a month as compared to what other people are being paid, it is the Office of Prime Minister to take a decision as to whether that is reasonable or whether the recommended increase should be accepted. As to whether we say, no, don't take it, and then all the officers in the public service, permanent secretaries and all the rest, who've been waiting for how many years for the exercise to end, that's the office of the Prime Minister's responsibility. For deferring this and dragging it on for a number of how many years, having the effect of also deferring the almost completed public service assessment, which applies to the public officials in the public service, that's a decision for the Prime Minister to make. And I've made it. In accepting the responsibility and maybe the wrath of those who have put that responsibility to me as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I bear that cross without fear of retribution. Any questions?
Under the SRC recommendation, you'll see your salary move from around 59,000.
Not my salary.
Well, the office
salary
of the Prime Minister
that applies to the office of Prime Minister. I happen, for the moment, to be the person who will be there. If tomorrow you are Prime Minister, I think it will apply to you too.
Sure, no problem. So the office of the Prime Minister's salary moves from 59,000 to around $87,000. Given the work that you do and the experience you have in the position, is that a justifiable and fair increase?
Well, I thought I just dealt with that. I'm saying that the body that has been asked to look at it in the widest possible context is the Salaries Review Commission. They have been asked to do that. So I don't see anybody asking them that. You're asking me. I am simply saying I have accepted the work that they have done. The recommendations have come after work that I believe has been good work, and I'm prepared to accept their work. And as far as I'm concerned, at the end of the story.
Do you think 87,000 is a fair salary?
No, I'm saying the work, whether it is fair or not, is not the point. Those who were given the assignment to do it, they have done it. These are the recommendations. I accept it without more on this occasion. That is all I'm saying.
What about those, for example, right now, the socio-economic climate? We have WIGAT asking for more money. We have the port workers. We have postal workers. What message do you have for members of the trade union movement right now who are looking at this?
The message is that all of these matters are part of compartments of the government's business, and every single one of them will be dealt with under the arrangements to deal with it. I know that there are those who will want to conflate them, and that's the politics of it. I mean, as a matter of fact, you mentioned WIGAT. Moments ago, I have directed the Minister of Finance, who is not the employer at the university, he's simply the gatekeeper at the Exchequer. I've directed the Minister of Finance to treat with that matter with the principal, who is in fact in law the employer, and let the processes work. It is the people who are trying to conflate the processes into one and the same. When I just told you, it took 13 years for the SRC report to be where it is here in front of us for that group of officers that's covered by them. But before, there was a time when you were dealing with public servants and giving them a 15% increase. In the scheme of that part of the work that deals with that. So let the processes work. And there's no process that has more consultation and examination than the work of the SRC with respect to emoluments. It is an emotional and emotive political thing, yes, but let the processes work.
Are you concerned that the SRC report, as it currently stands, the recommendations, contains inconsistencies? And is it a case of, I mean, you mentioned the Commissioner of Police and the salary of 31,000. I think the recommendation now is 43 and so on. And that salary is the same as some of the chairmen of service commissions, for example, who one would imagine the workload is a lot lighter. Are you satisfied that the report represents a job evaluation exercise that adequately considers the job description, the job function?
I could not answer that question because I have not gone through the documents and the references, because I'm not required to do that. That has been taken out of my hands and put in the hands of the CPO, who works with the Salaries Review Commission, who is free to co-opt any input into that exercise and come to a position. Whether I am satisfied with it and say, well, maybe they should get more, and so that's not for me to do. And it's a situation where I don't know that, as complex as it is, that we'll ever get to a position and say, okay, right, the formula has been so well used that everybody's happy with everything. That's why I just told you earlier on that in dealing with what's before the Parliament now, the representation under the cloak of law, challenging the proclamation of the recent bill, there is an area which we are referring for addendum approach to the SRC. I don't know what the SRC is going to do. The SRC might stand on the position that what we've done is the best we can recommend to you. And then that comes back now to the government. What does the government do? Right? So the government, at the end of the day, this recommending bodies, either you accept their work or you don't. When the work had treatment of the judiciary in the way they were treated in the first pass, the government took a position right then and there and said, it's coming back to you. We would like you to look at this again. And they did. They did so.
So the government did take a decision
on a matter which was sufficiently substantial. I said, when I was approached by the Chief Justice on the treatment of the JLSC officers, right then and there, a position could have been taken. Now I'm approached again on a handful of officers who, by virtue of the grouping,
so people have to complain. And then
No. One could go to the extreme. Every single officer who's covered there could come and say, I have a don't know to complain. And of course, maybe they might be complaining. Because certain things have happened that could generate complaints. Certain people have lost duty allowances, like permanent secretaries. And the discussion is usually, the public discussion is normally partial. You will see no discussion has come up about, well, they've been made to give up duty allowance, and there's an increase on the other hand, so one balances out the other and so on. That has not been the discussion. Most of the discussion so has been emotive and focusing on the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, which is not unusual. But then you have to look at it as a serious exercise and who is responsible for what. So if it is sufficiently serious, the reason why I've asked the Attorney General to pursue the part of advice to the President to ask him to look at it again is because, as Prime Minister, I don't want to see officers who have a legitimate legal claim to be fighting that with the SRC in law. Because you know what's going to happen there? They're going to be penny wise and pound foolish. Because the dollars to pay them, if they prevail in their argument, would be guaranteed to be less than paying the lawyers, the senior counsels, to go to court to argue to defend it. Get my drift? So you ask them to look at it again, and let's hope that good sense prevails, or that the professional work clarifies it for us all. I am a believer in responsibility and process. But that does not kill off the politics of it, because I expect that there are those who want to exploit it with their own interpretation.
Prime Minister, recently, at a speech, if I'm not mistaken, you did ask the population to sort of hold on in terms of the issue of managing finances as the government awaits the arrival of increased gas production over the next couple of years, or something along those lines. So in the context of that statement, how do you then look at that in terms of your acceptance?
Let me answer that question, because I've seen it. Sometimes the population is led down a road to have difficulty with truth. When I said to the population, in discussing our revenue situation going forward as a country, I was not discussing SRC report. I was discussing the country's revenue overall situation going forward. And I said that given where we've come from, given where we are, resource-based markets and earnings, and the action that we are taking, we expect to be in a difficult situation, present, to 2027 on our revenue building arrangements. And we expect improvements in our revenue building potential when we begin to have more to sell, hopefully in a market that pays a decent price. Well, of course, you're coming to say to me, well, because you say that, the SRC report that was coming for 13 years now must not be taken because the Prime Minister say tighten your belt. I didn't say that. You see, I took the opportunity to alert the country that between now and 2027, all of us, high earners, low earners, we are in a period where we are not as flush with revenues as we should be. But if you want to say, well, as a result of that, the SRC report cannot be entertained, I would say maybe that's a stretch. Because what you're saying is that an assignment that goes back for a 13-year exercise has now ended, unfortunately, on the verge of an election, and therefore you should be more concerned about the election than the process. And of course, you will stretch it to say that the Prime Minister did say nobody could get anything until 2027. I didn't say that. One of the first things I did as Prime Minister was to guide the Cabinet to pay public servants a $6.5 billion back pay issue. Because that's what the government had to do. That's what the government chose to do. That's how the government dealt with it. Okay? And therefore, all these interpretations and this incitement to fear, what do I have to fear? I've said before already, the only thing that I'm fearful of is that when I leave this job as Prime Minister, that it can be said truthfully that I led a group of people in Cabinet who were about stealing public money. That's the only thing I'm afraid of. But to use the processes, whether it has to do with WIGOT, SRC, local government, and have the processes work within the confines of the law, I have no problem with that. That's my job. And that's why they have one Prime Minister in the country.
Do you think that the acceptance of the report now will make all these negotiations that
I guess
not harder for
it is not an either or. We expect that the argument will be made in that context. Well, okay, those who were relying on the SRC, they have got their treatment. We who are relying on XYZ, we expect our treatment. It doesn't mean that it's going to be at the same dollar value level and so on. Completion of processes, right? And precisely that is what has been happening. And that is what is going to happen. All the processes are going to work tomorrow as they were working yesterday. Because the country has a management structure. The country has arrangements for dealing with these things. And I am not here going to usurp the authorities of the other processes. I'm going to guard very zealously the responsibility of the Office of Prime Minister to ensure that the country gets the management and the guidance that it needs, even when you don't agree.
Prime Minister, there's an argument as well that given where crime is, the country's infrastructure, for example, the roads, conduct in the parliament, some people are saying that politicians, elected representatives on both sides, they don't deserve an increase right now.
No, you haven't got the whole story. I saw one that said that we should pay to do the job. Yeah. So that's where are we now? We have the report before the Parliament. The law is clear that once it is there, it's going to come into force, and it will come into force with the appropriate circular from the Minister of Finance, whenever that is, whether it is tomorrow or next month. But that's how it comes into force. And I tell you this so that you won't be misled by others over it, right? And I also tell you that I believe that my country, Trinidad and Tobago, could pay a decent emolument to its management structure to continue managing the country. I am not unaware of the view in some quarter that the government and its appendages are a waste of time and nobody's worth anything. I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to the fact that the country's management structure does relatively good work, in some cases excellent work, and where they are to be compensated, I believe that the compensation that is recommended by the SRC is not exorbitant for the country's management structure.
Speaking about the nation's management structure, Prime Minister, part of that, of course, would have been, if I'm not mistaken, negotiations concerning as you would have mentioned, for the next 2 years, increase in gas production, including arrangements across the border with Venezuela and so on. You have, as you referenced earlier, a government in transition in the U.S. Will that form any part of your conversations in Barbados with the...
Absolutely. We have worked on nothing harder than trying to ensure that there is a stream of raw material that come into this country to allow us to earn at a level that we have become accustomed to in terms of earning in a high value market. As fate would have it, the only reason why the quality of life in this country that we have known it to be is because we have been selling some products in a high value market. If we were selling jute bags or grass seeds or something, the market might have been good for that. But the value, we are in hydrocarbon, and we have been trying to preserve our presence there to be able to earn in the high value market. And that is why this government from day one in 2016 focused on this question of our ability so to do. Our reserves have been used on a continuous basis to generate the profits that we had used up. And as you use it up, you have less left. There was a time when I just came in a wrong government, our reserves were for 25 or 30 years of gas. Our proven reserves are down now to about 7, 8 years. 10 years, but 10 years to close it down. But when it starts to decline, it's long before 10 years. Right? We used to be at 4.1 BCF. Right? I was there when we started building point leases, bulldozing cane fields and building road in the mud. And then we created point leases as the lifeblood of Trinidad and Tobago. And to see us now down at 2.6 or 2.5 BCF, I fully appreciate the difference between 4.1 BCF and 2.6 BCF in a country of great expectation. That is why the assignment of the government and its particular ministers have focused so heavily on this. And I'm usually quite despondent when I see local people so anxious to forecast the failure of those exercises. I want to ask one question again today. Had we not done what we did in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20 to ensure that we earned, without new contracts, an additional $18 billion by those negotiations and by successfully approaching those who paid those bills, what would have been our position today? I've been asking that question and not getting any answer. I've spoken to people on this matter who said to me, we are not breaking any contracts and therefore we don't have any liability. What's my answer to that? If I can't persuade you to do it within the contract, I have no case. I have been successful in leading a cabinet to persuade people who hold those contracts to pay to us under new arrangements billions of dollars more. And if you believe that your government is not working for you, then that is a belief that you are mistaken with.
Rhetorical question, Prime
The
Minister.
U.S. government recognizing the Venezuelan opposition leader as the president-elect, this current administration, and are you fearful that the winds of change are going to produce more and more a hardline approach to Venezuela and will affect us?
I don't want you to misunderstand me, right? But in accepting the reality of situations, I have seen it said that problems that don't have solutions are not problems, they are part of the landscape. Understand that? We are not in a position to influence U.S. local or international diplomacy and policy. We simply have to work with it. And in these matters, we are there because we are playing in world trade. You will see what's happening with world trade between Mexico, U.S. and Canada. That's what that is. We have a small microcosmic expression of that here. Minister Young is going to Caracas Tuesday. I'm going to Barbados on Monday because we have to stay engaged. There's a lot at stake for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We are hoping, anticipating, and advocating that it works out for us. But we're there. We have to be there. And in all of this, in all of what you just raised there, the singular matter in there is interest. Everybody is there trying to protect his or her own interests. And that's the pool in which we're swimming.
Prime Minister, if I'm not mistaken, Prime Minister, if I'm not mistaken, and you could guide me here, a lot of the progress that have been made, let's say on the Dragon Gas deal, would have been with negotiations led by yourself, Minister Young, and the administration in the U.S. With President Biden, the outgoing president, the president in Venezuela, Mr. Maduro. Now you have an incoming president, the president-elect, Mr. Trump, Republican Party. Are you concerned that the progress with the Democratic leadership presently outgoing could be mitigated or anyway affected by the incoming Republican?
It might very well be, but if you take that argument a little backwards, you will note that there has not really been any great window of difference between the Democratic Party in government and the Republican Party as ranking members when the Venezuela issue started. And it was President Trump had expanded on sanctions placed there by whom? A Democratic government. And Minister Young and I, we've been in many rooms where we know this. We have not been dealing with this matter of Trinidad and Tobago's future and its relationship with Venezuela as a matter of the United States, whoever is in office there. We've been holding the United States government to acknowledge as a government the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, if the government changes, our argument is still the same to the United States government, that you as a government recognize our position and the effects on our position regardless of who is in Washington. We might have more access to some people than others. But we worked alongside Republicans. In fact, when the delegation came here the last time with Secretary Blinken, in that delegation was at least one Republican. And when we've been to Washington to hammer this home around, in fact, as a producer of fertilizer, ammonia, and we were able to get an understanding more easily from some Republicans who are from agricultural states and who easily and very quickly understood our position and the role that we could play than getting it from a Democrat from New York, from New Jersey, who was, as a matter of fact, the most resilient opposition to our argument. You understand? So we talk to the American government, and we have been able to get some people or many people to understand where we are as a nation having to deal with the Venezuelan situation, our own situation. But I can tell you, as a result of that work over those months, as I speak to you now, there are 2 vessels working over the Dragon field. I feel proud about that. I tell you why. When I was a young geologist and we discovered gas off the North Coast, Dominic's and Egypt, and we hosted the Latin American Geological Conference here, that gas was known to be there. It's been there for millions of years. At the time when you had the conference, the prospect of that gas coming to market was virtually zero. When BG bought out those fields and started to produce gas here, I was around to see BG being the company that supported Trinidad and Tobago to become an owner of Train 1 and we to become an exporter of LNG and LNG to become our lifeblood. Today, to see ships working over the Dragon field under Trinidad and Tobago's initiative with an OFAC license from a turbulent Washington with a 30-year contract from Venezuela When I put all of these things together, I feel satisfied that good history has been made and the future for Trinidad and Tobago, whether that future is tomorrow or next month, but the future in commerce, in hydrocarbons, in gas, is much better today than before the 9th of September 2015. It also happens happening at a time when there's a huge lobby. Look at what happened the other day in Azerbaijan. There's a huge lobby to shut down the hydrocarbon business. But of course, we went to Qatar and said to them, that is your story. That is not our story. Our understanding is that there will still be a need for gas, the clean fuel, for decades to come, and therefore we are staying with our business while we go into renewables as well. And that's what your government has been doing. So I would really like that some of those conversations become more accessible in this country and focus more on those where you have a real interest than on somebody jumping up and telling you, I ain't taking that because the Prime Minister getting this and foolishness.
At this time, Trinidad and Tobago has no ambassador in Washington. At a time when all these things are taking place, this transition that is...
And the reason for that is that these issues, with all due respect to the ambassador, these are not issues that an ambassador deals with. This, from day one, these issues have been dealt with from the top of the government. So the absence of an ambassador in Washington in no way impacts on the progress of these decisions. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but I mean, the Office of Prime Minister in Trinidad and Tobago took responsibility for these issues. So when I made the appointment of the cabinet, it was not by accident that I appointed a member of the cabinet with a certain kind of competence and gave him that assignment to do these things. One of the first things that Minister Young did as a Minister of Government here was to pack a bag and head for Japan to tell the Japanese government what our position was with respect to CGCL, where we are today losing, what, $2 billion a year? And that is after we improved the contract. Let me repeat that. After the trip to Japan, where we got some relief from the Japanese government on the contract that we met, we're still losing billions. So you could imagine what would have happened if we didn't get some relief. So these are not the things that make the conversation in Trinidad and Tobago, but these are the sinews of our muscles.
Prime Minister, I just want to circle back to the Uyghurs issue. Can you just elaborate a little more on what exactly you would have said?
No. I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently about that. That is a matter which is underway, and I've told you, I asked the Minister of Finance to get a little closer to it, so I don't want you to pretend that I have control of it or I understand it. It's an industrial action. As a matter of fact, I came from there. As you may have forgotten, I mean, I was the head of department in UWI for years. So I don't want to pretend that I know what I really don't know. But the processes will work, and I hope we don't cut our own throats, right, in trying to equate certain things.
To the SRS report, what happens now? You would have mentioned it. I just want to get...
Well, to clarify the public debate, I just made it very clear. The government accepts the recommendation. To implement it, it will require a circular from the Minister of Finance, and the politics will start or it will end. We are not running from it to start it or to run from it from those who start it. I told you again, let me say it again, the only thing I'm afraid of is being truthfully accused of thieving government money. I have no fear of accepting the recommendations of the SRC if that is going to be my legacy.
Can the opposition refuse to accept the increases?
No. Let me put the question differently. Can the opposition spend more time, right, supporting the government in trying to collect the money that we're trying to collect in the case of one in Florida? 100 and how much million US dollars? That they refused to prosecute for 5 years, that we won the case in Florida and we now owe that money? Can the opposition support us in doing that? Can the opposition come to Parliament and sit and do their job on the Joint Select Committee to find out who gave away $900 million in the OAS contract? Can the opposition do that? Instead of trying to waste my time talking about the Prime Minister getting $1 million back pay?
Is it possible for them to say
What?
to whoever...
The opposition could file a motion on how dry leaves fall off any tree in the Parliament. They could do that and waste the Parliament's time. And they'll do worse, as I just pointed out to you. Try to mislead you that the Prime Minister has somehow interfered with the Pension Act to improve his pension. Tell you lies and misinformation, because this is the era of lies and misinformation, social media nonsense. Yes, they can do that. Is that what the country's interests will be served by? They have no control over that. We have no control over that.
So they can refuse to...
Can refuse to do what?
No, I'm
They could
saying
refuse
there is an
publicly. They could pretend that they're not interested in it. Privately, they're rinsing out your ears. But they want it. Come on, you all know that, man.
I just want to find out when the month end comes, whoever is paying MPs and government officials, whether that person,
Could
on
say-
the request of the opposition, would say, okay, your salary is currently 13, it was supposed to go to 18, I'm going to pay you 13 because you asked me.
And it is because that cannot be done, why that kind of old talk would go on. So even if you don't want it, when they give it to you, you turn their face and take it so. Because they know no public official could pay you part of your payment. They know that. This has happened before, you know. I remember there was a SRC report, and the Prime Minister then came under the same kind of pressure after we started getting the new salaries, and the Prime Minister decided then that we will give it back. One member of the cabinet said, "You are not authorized to give back my money," and walked out the cabinet because it was not process. It was politics. But on that day, the Prime Minister then decided to deal with the politics by giving back the money. And the member of cabinet said, "I didn't authorize anybody to give my money to anybody. This is not the process." And in the end, at that time, you know what a salary of a minister was? $8,000. So these in every country, emolument changes for parliamentarians and the government is always an emotive issue, and some people always try to misrepresent it. But hopefully, eventually, good sense will prevail that what we're dealing with here is a reasonable arrangement as put in place by, I don't know if other countries have a SRC. I'm not familiar with the details, but I know in this country, for this express reason of this conversation and this behavior, that is why the Salaries Review Commission was brought into being and located in the Constitution to prevent it from being parliamentarians willy-nilly every Monday morning saying, I want some more, and deal with themselves. The SRC puts it located in the Constitution as to how, when, and how much. And some people just wouldn't give up.
The government to decide.
Yes, but the government, even if the government want to decide, you can't decide of it outside of an SRC intervention. That's the point I'm making. So we dealt with it, maybe not all along the way, but partly way, because in the end, one could say the SRC is a recommending body, and it is there in the Parliament for everybody to see what has been recommended. I know that nobody could get anything that is not recommended there, unless, of course, the cabinet overrides it. And I'm saying there's no overriding, there's an acceptance after we had made an earlier intervention. Let us not get carried away. I think it has been a healthy discourse over the matter. It has been an open and transparent discourse. And I think it is not surprising that some people feel very strongly about it. It is not an equating template that if you get X, I will get Y, because it has never been that.
For transparency's sake, should the SRC explain to the public how it arrived at these figures? Do you think that would help?
Well, that's a good point you're making there, you know, because I have seen nobody here wanting to ask the SRC how you came to these positions. And maybe members of the SRC on television explaining to the public. But they know, but it's not everybody, especially when you agree to do public service. Not everybody may want to come out and be the target of all the opprobrium that will be heaped upon them for having the temerity to explain why you approve an increase for these wastrels called politicians. But I think it would be useful if your question is answered by the SRC, because I don't have the answer. I could admit to you here to nothing that says, I know how they came to ABCD, because they were doing an exercise. It's a professional HR exercise, and it took years. And unfortunately for those of us who are in the political arena, they jump in the government lap on the verge of, look how long, how many years have been in the government? 9 years, 10 years. I can't say carry it back because the election is due. I'm not doing that.
Could you tell us if the opposition leader is making much more than what is currently proposed?
Let me see if I can help you with that. I mean, I don't want to personalize the issue because that's where we lose our control. But just to answer your question, the current opposition leader was a prime minister before. That's not usual. Most times when you're a prime minister, you go after. But this prime minister came back and is still functioning. And functioning in a post that earns less than prime minister. But the prime minister's pension is what she's entitled to as a former prime minister. But the arrangements in place is that if you have that pension as your entitlement and you come back to function in a post that is below, arrangements are made so that you are not disadvantaged. That's why I'm saying that the opposition leader jumping out and trying to give the impression that he's defending the public interest with this old talk and trying to create all this mischief knows very well that is all misinformation towards an agenda of trying to create this emotion around this issue when not telling you, strictly speaking, it doesn't really affect me. Right? And interestingly enough, the recommendations of the commission gave more acknowledgement to the office of opposition, and that is why it has raised its emolument from where? 29 to 54?
The same as a cabinet minister.
Right? Giving it the same responsibility level as a cabinet minister. So if you stay home whole week and then come out and do nothing, you're drunk whole week, you still get the same as a minister who's working for the week. And of course, a member of parliament who is responsible 24/7 for a constituency, not being in cabinet, but just a member of parliament, is it reasonable to say, well, you only worth, in the scheme of things of the analysis, $17,000? So this is what the SRC would have dealt with. But this is not the discussion in the country. In the country is all political manima, mayhem and misinformation, and a dishonest opposition leader. That's what it is.
Statements made by the opposition leader recently, Prime Minister, that she will deport Venezuelans. Is that in any way could affect relations with the Venezuelans and gas deal?
Deportation is a legal process. It's not a political process. Even in the United States, with all that you see in there about deporting how many millions of people, it will all have to be done under a legal process. And where there may be challenges legally, and the degree of success will determine how successful you are in your legal response. Crime in this country, whether it is being committed by indigenous people here or foreigners visiting us, are subject to the rule of law in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know there's one citizen in this country who is saying, invite Venezuelan criminals to come here and criminalize us. That is just political disappointment. But again, there's some people who can only see the political opportunity. That sounds like something good. Because somebody is saying so in another country, and it's a big political point, and it was seen to have got favor in that country. Nobody wants criminals in our country, especially if they're coming to us from another country. So why you think you have to come and say you will do it and somebody else wouldn't do it? The reason why you're identifying yourself that you will do it is because you want credit. But you're implying that somebody else wouldn't want them, or somebody else is inviting them, which is a non-starter. It's just cheap politics. And what it does, it can hurt some people. Because when you play that kind of cheap politics, the consequences of that statement could be far-reaching. And it's only when the consequences are seen, you say, but this is the outcome of that. So we can do without that. But when you're following other people's playbook and copying from other people, you know, I remember being in primary school and a guy was copying another fella paperwork in an exam and copied the man's name, you know. Right? That's how I know he was copying from the other person. He copied the boy's name and put it on his own. And that's the best you can get from copiers. But we here in this government, if we have to take original positions, unique positions, we do it. That's why we restructured LNG. Unique. Never done anywhere else in the world. Go to the international companies, big, powerful oil companies, and say restructuring is a possibility. And that's why we celebrate that. When we signed the agreement in London to restructure Atlantic LNG, bringing benefits by the billions to Trinidad and Tobago, we celebrate that because it wasn't done before. But if you're just copying somebody and repeating what somebody else said, then you'll end up doing what she just did there. Thank you all very much, and I hope we have one more question. What was that?
Going back to the question that Ria asked, Paula Linder from Newsday. Seeing as how the opposition leader's pension is tied to the PM salary.
The what?
The prime.
No, it's not tied to. They are separate things.
Sorry, so my question is going to be, when she becomes of pensionable age, when she accepts her
I'm not discussing the personal arrangements of the opposition leader. Seriously, that is not for me to determine. That is something for the opposition leader to do. There are arrangements in place for that, and the point I'm making all morning, all afternoon, is that we have processes, and let's not personalize them.
The report of Minister Hines has withdrawn his nomination. Have you been told of that?
Actually, I have seen that. Actually, Mr. Hines was in cabinet this morning. We have not spoken about it, and therefore I don't have any additional information on the one that you have. But I think it's confirmed that Minister Hines will not be continuing to offer himself as a candidate in his constituency.
And did you have a hand in it?
No, I had no hand in it, and I'm not entirely surprised. I'm a little disappointed, but because Minister Hines had been with us for a long time, he has been a very, loyal, hardworking MP, and therefore he's coming to the end of his service. There's usually sadness in parting, but I'm sure he will be around with us in the party, if not in the government. So I haven't spoken to him yet, but I knew of his feelings along the way, so I'm not surprised that he would have. You see, when you come to a point sometimes that you come to a crossroad and you have to make a decision, and sometimes the angles at the crossroad are quite sharp. And I saw it somewhere, I think it's in the papers, I think, that is family discussion or something like that. I'm not surprised that I too have a family and I know how these things go. Thank you all very much. Good to see you.
I'm Renee Sion with another edition of Caribbean Week in Review.